Rain poured like judgment that night on Mercy Street. Deshawn's windshield wipers fought against the storm when he noticed her, a white nurse sitting alone on a bench, soaked to the bone, clutching a hospital badge to her chest. Her hands trembled. Her eyes looked empty. The rain wasn't just falling. It was drowning her world. He pulled over, rolled down the window. "Ma'am, you okay?" The nurse looked up slowly. Her lips quivered before she whispered, "They fired me because I spoke up for a black patient." That sentence cut through the rain like lightning. Deshawn stepped out of his truck, ignoring the cold water, soaking his uniform. "You what?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I saw what they did. I couldn't stay quiet. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening and the world needs to hear them." Deshawn handed her his jacket, noticing the hospital name, St. William's Medical Center, one of the city's most prestigious. "You worked there?" "Worked," she corrected, voice trembling. "They call me a troublemaker. Said I was bringing race into things that didn't matter." He frowned. "Race doesn't matter? Sounds like it mattered enough to cost you your job." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that hides pain. "You don't understand. I was just trying to protect a boy, 12 years old. He couldn't breathe. They ignored him because he was black. When I reported it, they said I made it up." Deshawn's jaw tightened. He'd seen that look before, the quiet exhaustion of someone who tried to do the right thing and got punished for it. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, my apartment's locked. My key card got deactivated. They called security on me like I was a thief." The storm grew heavier, thunder echoing through the street. Deshawn opened the truck door wider. "Get in. You're not spending another second out here." She hesitated. "You don't even know me." He gave her a half smile. "Don't need to. I just know injustice when I see it." As the truck engine hummed, Deshawn glanced at her badge again, Madison Clark, RN, a name that would soon expose one of the darkest truths hidden inside the walls of a hospital that claimed to save lives. The truck's heater hummed softly as rainwater dripped from Madison's sleeves. Deshawn handed her a towel he kept for his son's basketball games. "Here, dry off. You'll catch pneumonia before the night's over." She nodded quietly, voice trembling. "Thank you. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just could have watched that boy die." Deshawn glanced at her, his hands tight on the steering wheel. "What happened exactly?" Madison's eyes flickered toward the window. A young black boy came into the ER, struggling to breathe. His mother was begging for help. The attending doctor, Dr. Chad Mason, told her to wait her turn, but the kid was turning blue. Her voice cracked. "When I tried to help, Dr. Mason told me to remember the chain of command." Deshawn's jaw clenched. "Chain of command? You mean chain of silence?" She nodded. "Exactly. I documented everything, filed a report with HR. Next morning, I was called into a meeting. They said I fabricated the story to seek attention. They revoked my badge before I could even collect my things." The windshield fogged up as silence filled the cab. Deshawn wiped it with his sleeve, glancing at her again. "So they punish you for doing the right thing?" Madison nodded. "And now, I have nowhere to go. No family nearby. My rent was due today. I don't even know how I'll eat tomorrow." Deshawn thought of his own past, the layoffs, the whispers about being too loud when he called out discrimination at his old job. He saw the same tired fight in her eyes. "You did what any decent human should do," he said softly. "And for that, you got treated like trash." She looked at him, eyes glistening. "Why are you helping me?" Deshawn sighed, staring at the red light ahead. "Because too many people looked away when it happened to me. Someone's got to break that cycle." For the first time, Madison smiled faintly. "You're a single dad, right?" The car seat in the back gave it away. He chuckled. "Yeah, my boy's name is Jalen. 11 years old. Smart as hell, and he keeps me grounded." The rain began to ease as they pulled into a quiet diner off the highway. Deshawn parked on a flickering neon sign. "Come on, you're getting some real food, not vending machine sandwiches." Madison hesitated, then whispered, "You really don't have to. He cut her off gently. Madison, you helped save a black kid's life. Let someone help save yours tonight. The look on her face said it all. Relief mixed with disbelief that someone still cared. Steam rose from their coffee mugs as rain streaked the diner's windows. Madison sat across from Deshawn, still wearing his oversized jacket. The neon sign outside flickered, painting her face in flashes of red and blue, like an emergency light that wouldn't turn off. You really think you can fight a hospital that big? Deshawn asked quietly. Madison looked up. It's not about fighting them. It's about telling the truth. Deshawn leaned forward. Then let's start with names. Who else knew what happened? She hesitated, then whispered, Dr. Brandon Cole, head of administration. He told me to delete my report. Said the hospital couldn't afford another race controversy. I refused. That same afternoon, my access badge stopped working. Deshawn whistled softly. So they covered up. They do it all the time, she said bitterly. You think that boy was the first? There's a file of complaints buried somewhere. The staff just stay quiet to keep their jobs. He reached into his glove box and pulled out a small notebook. Give me every name, every time, every department. I'll start asking questions. Madison looked confused. Why would you risk it? You could lose your job too. Deshawn smirked. I'm a freelance contractor now. Nobody owns my silence anymore. He scribbled notes as she talked. Doctors, nurses, administrators. Each name sounded like a crack forming in the hospital's perfect facade. When she mentioned the boy's mother, Deshawn's heart tightened. You remember her name? Keisha Robinson, Madison said. She begged him to see her son. They ignored her for 20 minutes until I intervened. When I called for a crash cart, the doctor rolled his eyes. Deshawn's hand froze over the paper. He'd heard that name before. Robinson, she goes to my church. Her son Malik almost died that night. Madison's eyes widened. You know them? Yeah, that boy plays basketball with my kid. I thought he had asthma. Didn't know it was negligence. For a moment, they both sat in stunned silence. The rain outside had stopped, but the storm inside their minds had just begun. Deshawn closed the notebook. If that hospital buried this, we're digging it back up together. Madison exhaled shakily. Then I guess I'm not alone anymore. No, he said, standing. Now, you got someone who knows exactly what racism looks like, and I don't scare easy. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. 2 days later, Deshawn walked to the glass doors of St. William's Medical Center with a calm that didn't match the fire burning inside him. Madison followed close behind, wearing a borrowed blazer and nerves that wouldn't settle. They looked out of place, a working-class black man and a dismissed white nurse standing shoulder to shoulder in the hospital's polished lobby. Are you sure about this? Madison whispered. Deshawn nodded. If they bury the truth, we'll dig it up right here. He went straight to the receptionist. We need to speak with DR. Brandon Cole. It's about an incident report that disappeared. The receptionist's polite smile froze. Do you have an appointment? No, Deshawn said evenly, but he'll want to hear this before the press does. Minutes later, they were in Cole's office. The doctor looked up from his desk. Surprised? Madison, you're not supposed to be here. Madison's voice was steady but trembling underneath. You lied in my termination letter. You said my report was false. I have the mother's statement now, and her son's condition report. Cole adjusted his tie, eyes darting to Deshawn. Who are you? Just a father, Deshawn replied. A father whose son plays basketball with that boy you almost killed. The air turned electric. Cole leaned back, trying to hide his discomfort. Look, mistakes happen. No, Deshawn cut in sharply. Racism happened. You ignored that kid because of his skin. Madison pulled out her phone, pressing play. A recording filled the office, a doctor's voice laughing. Another one of those overreacting mothers. They always think it's racism. Cole's face drained a color. How did you? Doesn't matter. Deshawn said coldly. "We've already sent copies to the state board and 3 reporters." For the first time, Cole's voice broke. "You'll ruin the hospital's reputation." Madison stared him down. "You already did that when you let bias decide who gets to live." Security guards appear at the door, uncertain who to remove. Deshawn handed them a flash drive, evidence of criminal negligence. "You want to log that before your shift ends." As they walked out into the daylight, Madison whispered, "That recording was risky." Deshawn smiled faintly. "Yeah, but sometimes justice needs a little noise." The courtroom was silent, except for the ticking wall clock. Reporters lined the benches, cameras flashing every time someone breathed too loudly. At the front table, Madison sat beside Deshawn, her hands clasped tightly together, knuckles pale against his dark sleeve. Across the aisle, Dr. Brandon Cole adjusted his suit, tried to look confident while his lawyer whispered frantic instructions. The hospital's reputation was on the line, and so was his career. The judge entered. Court is now in session. Madison's heart pounded. She'd never imagined it would come to this. A simple nurse standing against one of the city's most powerful medical institutions. But when she glanced at Deshawn, calm and unflinching beside her, courage replaced fear. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Your Honor, this case isn't just about negligence. It's about a pattern, a system that decided who deserved care based on color." He played the audio Madison recorded. The same cruel laugh echoed through the speakers. Another one of those overreacting mothers. "They always think it's racism." Gasps rippled through the room. Deshawn watched Cole's face tighten, his jaw twitching as his own words sealed his fate. Cole's lawyer rose. "That clip was obtained illegally." The prosecutor smiled. "Actually, the device belonged to the hospital. It was part of their mandatory patient monitoring system. My client simply preserved a copy." The judge leaned forward. "Continue." Keisha Robinson, Malik's mother, took the stand next. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were fierce. "I begged them to help my boy. They walked past like he was invisible. That nurse, she was the only one who saw him as a human being." Madison looked down, tears forming as Keisha continued. "She didn't just save my son's life. She showed me not everyone inside the hospital was blind." The prosecutor nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Robinson." No further questions. When it was Deshawn's turn to testify, he stood tall. "I'm not a doctor. I'm just a dad who's tired of seeing people who look like me treated like problems instead of people. That woman beside me, she risked everything for the truth. It's time that truth meant something." The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge's gavel paused midair before he finally said, "We'll reconvene tomorrow for closing statements." As the crowd dispersed, Madison exhaled shakily. "You think we have a chance?" Deshawn smiled faintly. "We already made them listen. That's the first step toward winning." The next morning, sunlight cut through the blinds of the courtroom, slicing across the polished floor. Reporters filled every seat now. Word had spread. The racism at St. William's trial had become national news. Madison sat straighter than she had in weeks. She wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a witness, a voice that refused to stay silent. Dr. Brandon Cole looked different today. No arrogance, no smirk, just sweat and fear. His lawyer adjusted his tie before whispering, "Stick to the script." When Cole took the stand, the prosecutor walked slowly toward him, holding a folder filled with printouts. "Dr. Cole, you worked at St. William for 15 years? "Yes," he said, voice tight. "And in those 15 years, how many disciplinary actions for racial bias have been filed under your department?" Cole hesitated. None. The prosecutor flipped open the folder. "That's odd. Consider we found 12 reports marked administratively resolved. Every one of them involved black patients." A low murmur spread through the crowd. The prosecutor continued, his tone razor sharp. "Would you like to explain why those reports never reached the board?" Cole swallowed hard. "Those were internal matters." "Internal cover-ups, you mean?" Cole shifted in his seat, eyes darting toward the hospital's attorney. Madison's stomach twisted. This was a moment everything depended on. Then came the final blow. Marcus, a hospital janitor, stepped up unexpectedly. "Your Honor, I requested to testify." The judge allowed it. Marcus held up a small flash drive. Security footage from the night Malik Robinson came in shows Dr. Cole walking away while the kid was coding. Cole's face went pale. "That footage was deleted from your system, yes," Marcus said, "but the backup goes to a private server I manage for maintenance logs." "You didn't know that, did you?" The prosecutor plugged in the drive. The video played a silent, devastating truth. The boy's mother crying, the doctor ignoring her, Madison rushing in alone. The courtroom erupted. Cole's lawyer demanded a recess. The judge refused. "Enough evidence has been presented. This court will reconvene for sentencing." As Cole was escorted out, his eyes locked on Madison. "You ruined me," he hissed. She met his stare without flinching. "No, doctor. You did that the moment you forgot what saving lives meant." Deshawn placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You just gave a voice to every person they tried to silence." The verdict came a week later. The courthouse was packed. Community leaders, journalists, families who faced the same quiet racism but never had proof. Madison sat beside Deshawn, clutching his hand as the judge read the ruling. In light of overwhelming evidence, Dr. Brandon Cole is found guilty of gross negligence, racial misconduct, and obstruction of medical investigation. St. William's Medical Center will face federal review and public inquiry. Gasps filled the room. Madison's eyes flooded. Deshawn smiled faintly. That's what justice sounds like. Outside, reporters surrounded them. Microphones flashed, voices overlapped. "Madison, what message do you have for other nurses?" She steadied herself. "Speak up, even when they silence you. The truth has a heartbeat. You just have to keep it alive long enough for the world to hear it." Deshawn added quietly, "And for every black parent out there, your children deserve care, not judgment. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The following months changed everything. Madison was reinstated by a different hospital, one that valued her integrity. The federal probe exposed years of bias and led to policy reform. St. William's rebranded, but the stain would never wash away. For Deshawn, life returned to small joys. Mornings with Jalen before school, weekend games, peace, the kind he hadn't felt in years. Sometimes he'd still see Madison laughing with his son at the park. She wasn't the same woman who cried in the rain that night. She was stronger, louder, unafraid. One evening, while the sun set over the city, Madison turned to him. "You ever think about that night?" Deshawn smiled. "Every time it rains." She laughed softly. "You think it was fate?" He shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe it was just two people who refused to let hate win." They stood in silence for a while, the sound of distant thunder fading behind them. The storm was over, but its lessons remained. Deshawn looked toward the skyline, his voice low. "Funny thing about rain, it don't choose where to fall. It just reminds us we all get wet the same." Madison nodded. "And some storms wash more than dirt away. They wash the lies clean." Jalen ran up, holding a dripping basketball. "Dad, come on." Deshawn grinned. "All right, champ." He turned to Madison. "You coming?" She smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." As the three of them walked into the fading light, the city glowed behind them, not perfect, not healed, but changed. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.